Fighter pilots are panicking. A passenger jet is crashing. They can't control it. The plane drops fast at 30,000 feet. Everyone thinks they'll die. But a quiet shuttle driver sitting in the worst seat stands up. He walks through chaos like it's nothing. This broke, forgotten worker is about to reveal why his hands are steadier than any pilot alive, a Top Gun legend hiding in plain sight. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. The Boeing 737 had been cruising smoothly at 30,000 feet for the past 40 minutes. Flight 2847 from Denver to Seattle carried 267 passengers, most of them settling into the rhythm of the journey. Some read books, others watched movies on their phones, and a few tried to sleep despite the hum of the engines. In the cockpit, Captain Robert Williams checked his instruments for what felt like the 100th time. Everything looked normal. The weather ahead showed some turbulence, but nothing they couldn't handle. His first officer, David Thompson, was reviewing their approach procedures for Seattle. It was Thompson's first month on commercial flights after transitioning from regional carriers. In business class, two young Air Force officers sat side by side. Lieutenant Marcus Reed, 28 years old with sharp features and confident eyes, was showing his phone to Captain Amy Chen, 31, her black hair pulled back in a regulation bun. "That's the maneuver I was telling you about," Reed said, swiping through photos of his F-22 Raptor. "We pulled 7 GS in that turn. The simulator can't even replicate how intense it feels." Chen nodded, impressed. "Our squadron just got cleared for those advanced tactics. I can't wait to try them out. Flying commercial seems so boring after what we do." "Tell me about it," Reed agreed. "I mean, autopilot does 90% of the work up here. Where's the challenge?" They had no idea how wrong they were about to be proven. In the very last row of the aircraft, seat 38F, right next to the bathroom, sat a man in his early 60s. His hair was gray, his face weathered and lined with years of experience and hardship. He wore a navy blue uniform with a simple name tag that read, "Jack, Shuttle Driver." The uniform was wrinkled from a long shift driving passengers between terminals at Denver International Airport. Jack Hawkins stared out the small window, watching clouds drift past. He couldn't afford a better seat. The shuttle driver job paid minimum wage, and this ticket to Seattle had taken him 3 months to save for. He was going to see his daughter Sarah, though she didn't know he was coming. She hadn't spoken to him in 12 years. He wasn't even sure she'd open the door. The turbulence hit without warning. The aircraft jolted violently, throwing passengers against their seatbelts. Overhead bins rattled. A few oxygen masks dropped, swinging loose. People gasped and grabbed their armrests. In the cockpit, Captain Williams reached for the controls, but his hand never made it. His face suddenly twisted in pain. He clutched his chest, eyes going wide. "Captain." Thompson turned, alarm in his voice. "Captain Williams." Williams tried to speak, but only a strangled gasp came out. His body went rigid, then slumped forward against the controls. "Captain." Thompson grabbed his shoulder, shaking him. "Nothing." Williams was unconscious, his weight pressing against the yoke, causing the aircraft to bank slightly to the left. Thompson's hands shook as he reached for the radio. "Mayday, Mayday, this is Flight 2847. Pilot down, I repeat, pilot down. Captain has collapsed. I need help." The turbulence intensified. The aircraft shook violently, and the bank angle increased. Warning alarms began to sound in the cockpit. Thompson had only been flying commercial jets for 5 weeks. Before that, he'd spent 2 years on small regional planes that practically flew themselves. He'd never faced an emergency like this. His training screamed at him to take control, level the aircraft, maintain altitude. But his hands were frozen on the controls, his mind blank with panic. The lead flight attendant, Patricia Morales, rushed to the cockpit door, entering her emergency code. She saw Williams slumped over and Thompson's terrified face. "What's happening?" she demanded. "Heart attack, I think," Thompson stammered. "I don't know, I can't, the turbulence, I need help." The aircraft banked harder. 30 degrees now. Passengers screamed as bags fell from overhead compartments. The mountain range ahead was getting closer. In business class, Reed and Chen felt the violent motion. Years of training kicked in instantly. They unbuckled and rushed forward, Chen grabbing the intercom phone to reach the cockpit. "This is Captain Amy Chen, United States Air Force. We're pilots. We can help." Patricia heard the message and waved them forward frantically. Reed and Chen pushed through the cabin, passengers grabbing at them. "Are we going to die? What's wrong with the plane? Please help us." They reached the cockpit and saw the situation immediately. Williams unconscious, Thompson frozen, aircraft banking dangerously. "We're F-22 pilots," Reed announced, his voice full of authority. "Captain Chen and Lieutenant Reed. We can fly this aircraft. Let us help." Thompson looked at them like they were angels sent from heaven. "Thank God." "Yes, please, take the controls. I can't handle this." He moved aside, and Reed slid into the captain's seat while Chen took the first officer's position. They'd both gone through basic civilian flight training at the academy, enough to understand commercial aircraft systems. How different could it be from a fighter jet? Very different, as they were about to discover. Reed grabbed the yoke with the same firm grip he used in his F-22. He pulled back hard to level the wings. Nothing happened. The Boeing 737 weighs over 70,000 pounds when fully loaded. An F-22 Raptor weighs less than 45,000. The response time, the sensitivity, the entire flight characteristic is completely different. Reed pulled harder. "Why won't it respond?" "Try adding power," Chen suggested, her hands flying over the systems panel, trying to remember where everything was. Fighter jets had simplified, combat-focused controls. This civilian aircraft had hundreds of switches, buttons, and displays. Reed shoved the throttles forward aggressively. The engines roared, but the aircraft's response was sluggish, delayed. In an F-22, control inputs were instant. This massive commercial jet needed gentle, patient handling. "More rudder." Chen called out, seeing the bank angle still increasing. Reed stomped on the rudder pedal the way he would in a fighter. The aircraft yawed violently, passengers screaming louder as they were thrown sideways. Bank angle," the warning system blared. The turbulence hit again, even harder. Reed fought the controls, making rapid corrections, overcorrecting, then overcorrecting his overcorrections. Every aggressive input he made caused the aircraft to respond too much in one direction, then too much when he tried to fix it. The bank angle hit 35 degrees. The altitude was dropping. 2,000 feet lost already. In the cabin, passengers were crying, praying, holding each other. Bags and laptops crashed through the aisles. A baby was screaming. Someone was being sick in the bathroom. Patricia grabbed the cockpit doorframe. "What's happening? I thought you were pilots." "We are." Reed shouted back, sweat running down his face. "But this doesn't fly like our jets." Chen's fingers danced across the autopilot panel, trying to engage it, but the turbulence was too severe. The system kept disengaging. "Marcus, ease up on the controls. You're fighting it too hard." "I'm trying." Reed pulled back again, added aileron, the aircraft rolled further. Nothing works the way it should. Thompson was pressed against the back wall, pale and shaking. "We're all going to die. We're all going to die." "Shut up." Chen snapped at him. "We've got this." But she didn't sound convinced. She could see the terror in Reed's eyes, could feel the aircraft responding wrong to every input. They were making things worse, not better. Another violent shake. The stall warning began to chirp. "We're losing airspeed," Chen called out. Reed pushed the nose down instinctively, the way he would in a fighter to recover from a stall. Too aggressive. The aircraft pitched forward sharply. Passengers screamed as they felt momentary weightlessness. "Pull up, pull up," Chen shouted. Reed hauled back on the yoke. Too hard again. The aircraft pitched up violently. They were oscillating, creating a porpoising motion that was terrifying passengers and bringing them closer to losing complete control. The mountains were ahead. The storm was intensifying. And two of the Air Force's best fighter pilots were about to kill 267 people because they didn't understand that skill in one aircraft doesn't automatically transfer to another. "I can't control it," Reed finally admitted, his voice cracking. "It's not responding like a fighter. I don't know what I'm doing wrong." "We need help," Chen said, her own confidence shattered. "We need someone who actually knows how to fly this thing." In seat 38F, Jack Hawkins had been watching everything unfold. He couldn't see the cockpit, but he didn't need to. 50 years of flying experience told him exactly what was happening. He felt every wrong input, every overcorrection, every mistake the young fighter pilots were making. He knew those mistakes because he'd made them himself once, a lifetime ago, when he was young and arrogant and thought flying fighters meant he could fly anything. He knew they had maybe 3 minutes before the aircraft entered an unrecoverable situation. The turbulence was severe but manageable, if you knew what you were doing. The bank angle was dangerous but correctable, if you used the right technique. The altitude loss was concerning but not fatal, if you stopped fighting the aircraft. Those two young pilots were doing everything wrong. And everyone was going to die because of it. Hawkins unbuckled his seatbelt and stood up. A woman in the row ahead turned to look at him. "Where are you going?" "Sit down." He ignored her and walked forward through the violently shaking cabin. His legs were steady despite the turbulence. He'd flown through worse, much worse, in aircraft that were actually trying to kill him while being shot at. Passengers stared at him as he passed. Some reached out to grab him, to pull him back to his seat. "Sit down. Are you crazy? You'll get hurt." Hawkins kept walking. His shuttle driver uniform was wrinkled and stained with coffee from the morning shift. The name tag, Jack, shuttle driver, was crooked. He looked like nobody important. Just another working man trying to get by. He reached the cockpit and looked inside. Reed was wrestling with the yoke, sweat pouring down his face, his movements jerky and desperate. Chen was frantically pushing buttons, trying to find some system that would save them. Thompson was curled up in the corner, useless. Hawkins saw exactly what was wrong. The angle of attack was too high. The airspeed was decreasing. The bank angle was increasing. The young pilot was overcorrecting with aggressive inputs that were making the aircraft's natural stability work against them instead of with them. "You're over-controlling," Hawkins said calmly from the doorway. "Every input you make is too aggressive for this aircraft." Reed's head snapped around. "Who are you? Get out of the cockpit." "I'm someone who knows what he's doing," Hawkins replied, stepping forward. "Now step aside before you kill 267 people." Reed's face flushed with anger and embarrassment. "You're a shuttle driver. I can see your uniform. Get out before I have you arrested." Hawkins looked at the young lieutenant with eyes that had seen more combat, more emergencies, more life-and-death situations than Reed could imagine. "I'm Captain Jack Hawkins," he said quietly. "Call sign Viper. I flew F-14 Tomcats for 15 years. I instructed at the Navy Fighter Weapons School, Top Gun, for 20 years. I trained over 300 pilots. And right now, I'm the only person on this aircraft who can save your life. So move. Now." Reed and Chen both froze. "Viper?" Chen whispered, her eyes going wide. You're Viper. The Viper. Reed's mouth opened and closed. But you're supposed to be dead? Retired? Still famous? Hawkins moved toward the captain's seat. I'm none of those things. I'm a 62-year-old man who drives a shuttle for $9 an hour. But I'm also the best pilot on this aircraft. So get out of that seat and let me fix this before we all die. The stall warning was screaming now. The bank angle hit 40 degrees. Reed scrambled out of the seat. Hawkins slid into the captain's seat and immediately placed his hands on the yoke with a touch so light it looked like he was barely holding it. His eyes scanned the instruments in one smooth movement. Airspeed, altitude, attitude, heading, engine parameters. He saw everything in less than 2 seconds. Reduce power to 70%, he said calmly. Chen, still in shock, reached for the throttles and pulled them back. Gently, Hawkins corrected. This is a civilian aircraft, not a fighter. Everything is gentle. He applied the slightest pressure to the yoke, barely moving it. The aircraft began to respond, slowly leveling out. He didn't fight it, didn't force it. He worked with it. The bank angle decreased. 35 degrees. 30. 25. Trim nose down, 1 unit, Hawkins instructed. Chen adjusted the trim wheel with shaking hands. The altitude stabilized. The stall warning stopped. Within 90 seconds, the aircraft was flying straight and level. The turbulence was still there, but the aircraft was riding through it smoothly instead of being thrown around like a toy. Reed stood behind the seats, watching in disbelief. How did you? We tried everything. You tried fighter pilot techniques, Hawkins said, his eyes never leaving the instruments. Which is exactly wrong for this aircraft. You were fighting it. I'm flying it. He made another micro-adjustment, so small Reed barely saw his hand move, but the aircraft responded perfectly. Chen was staring at him. Sir, I studied your tactics at the academy. The Viper 6 maneuver is required learning for all fighter pilots. You're a legend. Why are you? She trailed off, looking at his shuttle driver uniform with confusion and something like horror. Why am I driving an airport shuttle? Hawkins finished for her. Because 12 years ago, the United States Navy decided I was expendable. Now be quiet and learn something. Reed felt shame burning through him. This man, this legend whose manuals he'd studied for years, whose call sign was spoken with reverence in every fighter squadron in the country, was wearing a minimum wage uniform. And Reed had just told him to get out of the cockpit. Sir, I'm sorry, Reed began. I didn't know. You didn't know because you didn't ask, Hawkins cut him off. You saw a shuttle driver and assumed I was nobody. That's the first lesson. Never judge a person's skill by their uniform. Judge them by their hands on the controls. The aircraft hit another pocket of turbulence. Hawkins barely moved, just slight adjustments that kept them stable. It looked effortless. How are you doing that? Chen asked in awe. I'm not fighting the aircraft, Hawkins explained, his voice taking on the tone of an instructor. You were making aggressive inputs because that's what works in an F-22. But this Boeing weighs 76,000 pounds. It has hydraulic controls with artificial feel. It's designed to be stable, to resist rapid movements. When you force it, you're working against its natural tendency. When you work with it, use gentle inputs, give it time to respond, it flies beautifully. He demonstrated, moving the yoke perhaps a quarter inch. The aircraft banked smoothly. See? Gentle. Patient. This is not a dogfight. This is flying. Reed watched the master at work and felt humiliation wash over him. He'd been so confident, so sure his fighter pilot skills made him qualified. Now he saw how wrong he'd been. Sir, Reed asked quietly, what happened 12 years ago? Hawkins's jaw tightened. His eyes went distant for just a moment. My son died, he said simply. And the Navy blamed me for it. Forced me to resign. Took everything I had. Everything I was. But that's, Chen started. A long story that can wait until we're on the ground, Hawkins interrupted. Right now we have another problem. Seattle is reporting severe thunderstorms. We're going to have to land this aircraft manually in zero visibility with turbulence worse than what we've got now. And you two are going to watch and learn how it's actually done. The approach to Seattle was a nightmare. The weather had deteriorated rapidly. Thunderstorms rolled across the Puget Sound, lightning flashing in dark clouds. The tower reported visibility at less than half a mile with severe wind shear. Thompson had recovered enough to handle radio communications, though he still looked green. Tower is offering us a diversion to Portland. Better weather there. No, Hawkins said firmly. We have an unconscious captain who needs immediate medical attention. We're landing in Seattle. He keyed the radio himself. Seattle Tower, Flight 2847, we have a pilot medical emergency and we're coming in regardless of weather. Request priority landing, runway 16 right. 2847, cleared to land runway 16 right, winds variable at 30 gusting to 45, extreme caution advised. Understood, Tower. Hawkins began configuring the aircraft for landing. Lieutenant Reed, call out airspeeds. Captain Chen, monitor the instruments and tell me if you see anything unusual. Yes sir, they both replied instantly, falling into the role of students. Hawkins had already reviewed the approach plates in his mind. He'd flown into Seattle hundreds of times. He knew the terrain, the approach path, the altitude restrictions. All of it was still there in his memory, filed away for 12 years but instantly accessible. Flaps 10, he ordered. Chen reached for the flap lever, then paused. Sir, in this turbulence, should we? Flaps 10, Captain, Hawkins repeated calmly. Trust the procedure. Trust the aircraft. She set flaps to 10 degrees. The aircraft slowed, became slightly more responsive. Good. Now watch what I'm doing. I'm not chasing the needles on the instruments. I'm establishing a trend, letting the aircraft settle into the approach. Fighter pilot instinct is to correct immediately when you see a deviation. Commercial flying is about recognizing that the aircraft will self-correct if you give it time and don't interfere. They descended through 8,000 feet. The turbulence was violent. The aircraft shook and bucked. Hawkins's hands moved constantly, tiny corrections, never still but never aggressive. Airspeed 210, Reed called out. Flaps 15. The localizer needle came alive as they intercepted the approach path. Hawkins turned smoothly onto the centerline. See how I'm not fighting the wind, he explained while flying. I'm establishing a crab angle, letting the aircraft drift. I'll straighten out right before touchdown. If you try to force the aircraft to track straight in a crosswind, you'll be fighting it the entire way down. Lightning flashed close enough to illuminate the cockpit. The aircraft dropped suddenly in a downdraft, then shot up in an updraft. Hawkins didn't react beyond slight adjustments. His breathing was steady, his voice calm. This is what separates good pilots from great ones, he said. Not the flying when everything is perfect. The flying when everything is falling apart. That's when muscle memory, training, and experience take over. That's when you prove what you're made of. Reed watched the altimeter unwinding. 5,000 feet. Gear down. Flaps 25. The landing gear extended with a thunk. The aircraft slowed further, becoming more stable but also more susceptible to wind. The key to landing in severe turbulence is consistency, Hawkins continued his impromptu lesson. Don't chase perfection. Maintain a stable approach speed, stable descent rate. If you're high, you're high. If you're low, you're low. Make corrections, but make them gentle and deliberate. They broke through the clouds at 800 feet. Rain hammered the windscreen. The runway lights were barely visible through the downpour. 2,000 feet, Reed called, his voice tight with tension. Flaps 30. Final landing checklist. Chen ran through the checklist with shaking hands. She couldn't believe how calm Hawkins was. They were landing a crippled aircraft in a thunderstorm with a dead captain, and he might as well have been taking a Sunday drive. The runway appeared ahead, lights blurred by rain. The aircraft was being pushed sideways by the crosswind. Hawkins maintained his crab angle, the nose pointing 15 degrees off the runway centerline. 500 feet. Flaps full. Continue. The ground rushed up. Hawkins waited, then at the last possible moment kicked the rudder to straighten the nose while lowering the upwind wing. The main gear touched with barely a bump. Perfect. He deployed the thrust reversers, applied brakes smoothly. The aircraft rolled down the wet runway, decelerating in a perfectly controlled fashion. 30 knots, Reed called out, amazed. Hawkins turned off at the next taxiway and brought the aircraft to a stop. He set the parking brake and looked at the two young pilots. That, he said quietly, is how you land an aircraft. Chen realized she'd been holding her breath. Sir, that was incredible. That was adequate, Hawkins corrected. Now help me with your captain. He needs medical attention. Paramedics rushed onto the aircraft within minutes. Captain Williams was unconscious but alive, his heartbeat stabilizing. They loaded him onto a stretcher and rushed him to the hospital. The passengers evacuated in orderly chaos, many of them crying with relief, some stopping to thank the crew. A few noticed the man in the shuttle driver uniform and wondered why he was in the cockpit, but most were too rattled to care. Patricia found Hawkins as he was preparing to leave. I don't know who you are, but you saved us. Thank you. Just doing what needed to be done, Hawkins replied. He picked up his small carry-on bag from where Thompson had stowed it and started toward the exit. Reed and Chen blocked his path. Sir, we need answers, Reed said firmly. You're a legend. You're in every training manual we have. The Viper tactics revolutionized fighter combat. And you're driving a shuttle. What happened? Hawkins looked at them both for a long moment. Then he sighed and set down his bag. You really want to know? Fine. Let's get some coffee. They ended up in a quiet corner of the airport, the storm still raging outside the windows. Hawkins bought himself a black coffee with his last few dollars. Reed and Chen insisted on paying for their own, sensing the man's pride. 12 years ago, Hawkins began, staring into his cup, I was at the top of my career. Senior instructor at Top Gun. Respected. My call sign was spoken in the same breath as legends like Maverick and Iceman. I'd trained the best of the best. He took a sip of coffee. I had a son. Jake Hawkins. He was a fighter pilot too. Following in his old man's footsteps. Smart kid. Natural talent. He was stationed at Oceana, training under a different instructor for night carrier landings. Reed and Chen listened silently, sensing the pain in his voice. There was an accident during a night exercise. Jake's F/A-18 crashed on approach. He died instantly. Hawkins's voice was steady, but his hands trembled slightly around the cup. Initial investigation said mechanical failure. A hydraulic malfunction. The Navy launched a full inquiry. But sir, Chen said gently, if it was mechanical failure, how could they blame you? Because someone needed to be blamed, Hawkins said bitterly. The hydraulic system that failed was in 30 other aircraft. If they admitted it was a design flaw or a maintenance issue, they'd have to ground the entire fleet. Congressional hearings. Billion-dollar lawsuits against the manufacturer. The Navy and the contractor had a relationship worth billions. So they blamed you instead, Reed said, anger creeping into his voice. They claimed I improperly trained Jake, that he wasn't prepared for night operations, that my teaching methods were outdated and dangerous. Never mind that Jake wasn't even my student. Never mind that I'd successfully trained 300 other pilots without a single fatality. They needed a scapegoat, and I was convenient. Hawkins's jaw clenched. I defended myself. I showed them my training records, testimonials from other pilots, evidence that Jake's instructor had cut corners. Didn't matter. They pushed me to resign, for the good of the service. If I fought it, they'd court-martial me and destroy whatever reputation I had left. If I went quietly, they'd give me an honorable discharge. That's not honorable, Chen said fiercely. That's a cover-up. Welcome to the military, Hawkins said with a hollow laugh. I resigned. Lost my pension because I didn't have enough years as an officer, only enlisted time counted. Lost my reputation. The news reported Top Gun instructor forced out after fatal training accident. Everyone assumed I was guilty. He finished his coffee. My wife couldn't handle the scandal. She left me within 6 months. My daughter Sarah believed what the Navy said, believed I was responsible for her brother's death. She stopped talking to me. I haven't spoken to her in 12 years. Jesus, Reed whispered. I spent the last 12 years working whatever jobs I could get. Aircraft mechanic for a while, but word got around and nobody wanted to hire the disgraced Top Gun instructor. Security guard. Walmart greeter. Now I drive a shuttle at Denver International for $9 an hour. I have a studio apartment in a bad neighborhood. I eat ramen noodles most nights. And everyone who knew Captain Jack Hawkins, call sign Viper, thinks I'm either dead or don't exist anymore. He looked at them both with eyes that had seen too much loss. So that's why I'm driving a shuttle. That's why I was in seat 38F, the cheapest seat on the plane, wearing this wrinkled uniform, traveling to Seattle to try one more time to talk to a daughter who hates me. Any other questions? Chen had tears in her eyes. Sir, that's wrong. That's completely wrong. Life's wrong sometimes, Captain, Hawkins replied. You get used to it. No, Reed said firmly, standing up. We're not getting used to it. You just saved 267 lives. You're still the best pilot any of us have ever seen. And we're going to fix this. Hawkins gave him a tired smile. I appreciate the sentiment, Lieutenant. But it's been 12 years. The case is closed. The Navy isn't going to admit they were wrong. Then we'll make them, Chen said, standing beside Reed. You trained us to have honor, sir. Your manuals taught us that. Now we're going to show you what honor means. Reed and Chen didn't waste time. Within hours of landing, Reed was on the phone with his squadron commander at Langley Air Force Base. Chen was contacting JAG officers she knew, asking about procedures for reopening Navy investigations. Sir, we need access to accident investigation records from 12 years ago, Reed explained to his commander. A Navy F/A-18 crash. Pilot was Jake Hawkins. Why are you digging into old Navy cases, Lieutenant? Because we just watched Jake Hawkins's father save a commercial airliner, sir. And because we think the Navy railroaded him. His commander was quiet for a moment. You're talking about Viper. Jack Hawkins? I thought he was dead. He's very much alive, sir. And he's driving an airport shuttle because the Navy destroyed his career to cover up a mechanical failure. That's a serious accusation, Reed. I know, sir. That's why we need the evidence. It took 3 days of bureaucratic fighting, but Reed and Chen got access to the accident investigation files. What they found made them furious. The initial investigation had found a hydraulic line failure in Jake Hawkins's aircraft. The failure was caused by a defective coupling manufactured by Aerodyne Systems, a major defense contractor. The same coupling was installed in 37 other F divided by a -18s in the fleet. But a week after that initial report, a second report appeared. This one blamed inadequate training procedures and instructor failure to properly prepare pilot for night operations. It recommended disciplinary action against the senior instructor responsible for the pilot's training development. Jack Hawkins had never been Jake's instructor. But he was the most senior instructor at the command, and his name was well known. Perfect scapegoat. The second report was signed by Rear Admiral William Morrison, who had just negotiated a $2 billion contract with Aerodyne Systems for next-generation aircraft parts. Chen found an email buried in the files. Morrison to his staff, "We cannot afford to ground the fleet over one part failure. Aerodyne is too important to our acquisition pipeline. Find another cause." They murdered his career to protect a defense contractor, Chen said, her voice shaking with rage. They let everyone think he killed his own son. Reed was already making calls. "We need to take this to someone who'll listen. Someone who can force the Navy to reopen the case. The Navy will fight us," Chen warned. "Morrison is still active duty. Vice Admiral now. He has power." "So do we," Reed replied. "We have the truth. And we have social media." Chen smiled. "You're thinking what I'm thinking. The passengers from that flight are already posting videos. Shuttle driver saves plane. Hero in uniform. It's going viral. We just need to add the context." They reached out to the passengers, explained who Jack Hawkins really was, what had happened to him. Within hours, the story exploded. Top Gun legend forced into poverty by Navy cover-up. Wrongly blamed instructor saves 267 lives while working minimum wage. Military sacrificed hero to protect defense contractor. The news networks picked it up. Passengers gave interviews, praising Hawkins. Reed and Chen appeared on morning shows, providing the evidence they'd uncovered. "Captain Hawkins is the greatest instructor in Navy history," Chen told one interviewer. "He trained hundreds of pilots. He saved those lives on that flight. And he's been driving a shuttle for $9 an hour because the Navy needed a scapegoat." "Do you have proof of this cover-up?" the interviewer asked. Reed held up documents. "We have emails. We have the original investigation report showing mechanical failure. We have the second report that blamed Captain Hawkins. And we have the timeline showing this happened right when Admiral Morrison was negotiating a contract with the company that made the defective part." The Navy's Public Affairs Office was overwhelmed with calls. Congressmen started asking questions. Veterans groups demanded answers. And in his tiny studio apartment in Denver, Jack Hawkins watched the news coverage and cried. The story became a national phenomenon. Passengers from Flight 2847 organized a press conference. They stood together, 267 people who owed their lives to a man in a shuttle driver uniform. "He didn't have to help us," one passenger said, a mother holding her young child. "He could have stayed in his seat. But he walked to that cockpit and saved us all. And then he just left. Like it was nothing." Another passenger, a businessman, added, "I saw those two military pilots trying to fly the plane. They were terrified. They were making it worse. Then this old guy in a wrinkled uniform takes over, and suddenly everything is smooth. Lands us in a thunderstorm like it's a sunny day. That's skill. That's a lifetime of experience." The videos from passengers went viral. Shaky cam footage of the turbulence, the screaming, then the sudden smooth flight when Hawkins took control. Audio recordings of his calm voice teaching the young pilots while landing. Defense blogs picked up the story. Aviation forums exploded with discussions. Retired Navy pilots started coming forward with their own stories. "Viper trained me in 2003, one retired commander posted. Best instructor I ever had. When I heard he'd been forced out, I couldn't believe it. Now I know why. This is shameful. Viper's tactics are still taught at Top Gun today," another pilot wrote. His manuals are gospel. The idea that he was responsible for a training accident is ridiculous. Everyone who knew him knew the Navy was lying. Admiral Morrison tried to control the damage. He issued a statement: the 2013 investigation into Lieutenant Jake Hawkins's tragic death was thorough and appropriate. Captain Hawkins resigned of his own accord. Reed immediately released the emails. Morrison's own words, buried in the files, find another cause. We can't ground the fleet. The statement fell apart within hours. Congresswoman Janet Taylor, head of the Armed Services Committee, announced formal hearings. If the Navy covered up a safety issue to protect a contractor relationship, and destroyed an innocent officer's career in the process, there will be consequences. In Seattle, Hawkins's daughter Sarah saw the news coverage. She was 38 now, married with a 5-year-old son. She'd spent 12 years believing her father was responsible for her brother's death. 12 years of anger and pain. Now she saw him on the news. Older, grayer, wearing that shuttle driver uniform. Saving hundreds of lives while she'd refused to even speak to him. She watched the interview with Reed and Chen, saw them hold up the documents proving the cover-up. Saw the emails from Admiral Morrison. Saw the original investigation report that cleared her father. Her husband Mark found her crying in front of the television. Sarah. What's wrong? I was so cruel to him, she sobbed. For 12 years. I believed them. I believed the Navy. And Dad he never once told me the truth. He just accepted that I hated him. Mark sat beside her. You didn't know. I should have known. Sarah stood up, pacing. Jake was my brother, but Dad was my father. I knew him my whole life. I knew what kind of man he was. And I just threw him away. She grabbed her phone, hands shaking as she searched for his number. She deleted it years ago, but now she desperately needed it. Mom might have it, Mark suggested. Sarah called her mother. The conversation was tense. Her mother had remarried 5 years ago, moved to Florida, tried to forget the whole painful chapter of her life. Sarah, why are you asking about your father? Have you seen the news, Mom? About the plane? A long silence. Then, yes. I saw. You knew, didn't you? Sarah's voice broke. You knew the Navy was lying. Her mother's voice was small, ashamed. I didn't want to believe it at first. But yes, eventually I knew. Your father tried to tell me. He showed me the evidence. But I was so angry about Jake, so hurt. I needed someone to blame. And the Navy made it so easy to blame him. How could you? Sarah whispered. I was weak, her mother admitted. And by the time I realized the truth, it had been so long. I'd already left him. Already started a new life. I was too much of a coward to admit I was wrong. Sarah closed her eyes. I need his number. Her mother gave it to her, then added quietly, Sarah, when you talk to him, tell him I'm sorry too. Tell him Margaret is sorry. For whatever that's worth. Sarah hung up and stared at the number for 10 minutes before calling. It rang 4 times. She almost hung up. Then she heard his voice. Hello. 12 years since she'd heard it. 12 years of silence. Dad? Her voice cracked on the word. It's Sarah. Jack Hawkins was in his studio apartment when his phone rang. He'd been watching the news coverage in a daze, unable to process what was happening. The story had taken on a life of its own, completely beyond his control. When he saw the caller ID, his heart stopped. Sarah. His hand trembled as he answered. Hello. Dad? It's Sarah. He sat down heavily on his worn couch. For a moment, he couldn't speak. Dad, I saw the news. I saw everything. The emails, the cover-up, what the Navy did to you. I'm so sorry. Sarah. He had to clear his throat. You don't have to. Yes, I do, she interrupted. I do have to apologize. I believed them. I believed you were responsible for Jake's death. I spent 12 years hating you for something you didn't do. And you never once tried to defend yourself to me. How could I? Jack said softly. You just lost your brother. You were grieving. And the evidence the Navy presented looked convincing. I couldn't prove I was innocent, not then. All I could do was accept it and try to move forward. You could have fought harder. You could have made me listen. Sarah, you weren't ready to listen. You needed someone to blame, and I understood that. I'd rather have you hate me and have some peace than force you to doubt everything while you were already in so much pain. Sarah was crying now. That's not fair. That's not fair that you sacrificed yourself like that. You're my daughter. Of course it's fair. Dad, where are you? The news said you were coming to Seattle. Are you still here? Jack hesitated. I'm actually at the airport. My flight back to Denver leaves in 2 hours. I didn't. I wasn't sure you'd want to see me, even with all this coming out. Are you kidding me? Sarah's voice rose. Stay there. Don't you dare get on that plane. I'm coming to get you right now. You're coming to my house. You're meeting your grandson. And then we're going to figure out how to fix this mess the Navy made. Sarah, you don't have to. Dad, I've wasted 12 years. I'm not wasting another minute. Stay where you are. I'll be there in 30 minutes. She hung up before he could argue. Jack sat in the airport terminal, still holding his phone, tears running down his weathered face. An elderly woman sitting nearby noticed and offered him a tissue. Are you all right, dear? I think, Jack said, his voice full of wonder, I think I'm going to be. 35 minutes later, Sarah burst through the terminal doors. She was tall, with her mother's build but Jack's eyes. She stopped when she saw him, this old man in a wrinkled shuttle driver uniform, and her composure completely shattered. She ran to him and threw her arms around him, sobbing into his shoulder. I'm sorry, Dad. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Jack held his daughter for the first time in 12 years and felt something he thought was dead inside him come back to life. Hope. 3 weeks later, Jack Hawkins sat in a congressional hearing room wearing a borrowed suit. Reed and Chin sat behind him, both in their dress uniforms. The room was packed with reporters, veterans, and interested citizens. Congresswoman Taylor gavelled the hearing to order. We're here today to examine the 2013 investigation into the death of Lieutenant Jake Hawkins, and the subsequent forced resignation of Captain Jack Hawkins from the United States Navy. Captain Hawkins, thank you for being here. Jack nodded. His hands were steady on the table. Sarah sat in the front row of spectators, giving him strength. Vice Admiral William Morrison sat at his own table, flanked by Navy lawyers. He looked confident, almost bored. Taylor began with the facts. The accident. The initial investigation finding mechanical failure. The second investigation blaming training procedures. The timeline of Morrison's contract negotiations with Aerodyne Systems. Admiral Morrison, can you explain why the investigation's conclusion changed so dramatically in the span of 1 week? Morrison's voice was smooth, practiced. Congresswoman, as more evidence came to light, our understanding of the accident evolved. The initial report focused solely on mechanical systems. The second, more thorough investigation examined all factors, including training protocols. Yet the mechanical failure was documented and verified, Taylor pressed. A defective hydraulic coupling manufactured by Aerodyne Systems. The same coupling was in 37 other aircraft. Why wasn't the fleet grounded for inspection? We conducted inspections of all affected aircraft within 2 weeks. The couplings were replaced as a precautionary measure. Quietly replaced, Taylor corrected. Without any public acknowledgement of a safety issue. And this happened during your contract negotiations with Aerodyne, did it not? Morrison's jaw tightened. The timing was coincidental. Reed stood up from the audience section. Permission to speak, Congresswoman. Taylor nodded. Lieutenant Reed, you were granted testimony privileges. Please proceed. Reed walked to the microphone. I'm Lieutenant Marcus Reed, F-22 pilot. I was one of the pilots who attempted to fly Flight 2847 before Captain Hawkins took control. I've reviewed the accident investigation files extensively. He pulled out a document. This is an email from Admiral Morrison to his staff, dated 3 days after Lieutenant Jake Hawkins's death. I quote, "The Aerodyne contract is critical to future acquisitions. We cannot afford negative publicity about parts failures at this time. Find another cause for the accident." The room erupted. Reporters shouted questions. Morrison's face went red. That email was taken out of context. Morrison snapped. What context makes that acceptable? Reed shot back. You ordered your staff to cover up a parts failure. You destroyed Captain Hawkins's career to protect a contractor. That's not context. That's corruption. Chen stood next. Permission to speak, Congresswoman. Granted, Captain Chen. I'm Captain Amy Chen, also an F-22 pilot. I've studied Captain Hawkins's training methods extensively. They're still taught at Top Gun today. His safety record was perfect. 300 pilots trained, 0 fatalities. The suggestion that his methods were inadequate is not only false, it's absurd. He's literally the standard by which all other instructors are measured. She turned to Morrison. You didn't just cover up a mechanical failure, Admiral. You destroyed the reputation of the best instructor in Navy history. You took away his career, his pension, his family. You forced a decorated veteran to work minimum wage jobs while you got promoted to Vice Admiral. That's not just wrong. That's disgraceful. The room applauded. Morrison's lawyers whispered urgently in his ear. Taylor gavelled for order. Admiral Morrison, do you have a response? Morrison stood, his composure cracking. I made decisions based on the information available at the time. I acted in what I believed were the best interests of the Navy. You acted in the best interests of your career, Jack said quietly from his seat. Everyone turned to look at him. He stood slowly, with dignity. You knew the truth, Admiral. You knew that coupling was defective. You knew I had nothing to do with Jake's death. But you needed someone to blame, and I was convenient. Senior instructor, well-known name, perfect scapegoat. Jack's voice was steady, but the pain underneath was clear. You didn't just take my career. You took my son's memory. For 12 years, everyone believed Jake died because of inadequate training. That his death was preventable if only his instructors had done their jobs better. You made his death meaningless. He stepped forward. Jake Hawkins died because of a defective part that your contractor made. He died because you valued a contract over pilot safety. And you covered it up by destroying me. Well, guess what, Admiral? I'm still here. The truth is still here. And you're going to answer for what you did. The room was silent. Taylor looked at Morrison. Admiral, I'm recommending a full investigation by the Inspector General. I'm also recommending that your current contract negotiations be suspended pending the outcome. This hearing is adjourned. The hearing video went viral within hours. Social media exploded with support for Hawkins. #Justice for Viper trended worldwide. Veterans organizations demanded Morrison's resignation. Active duty pilots started sharing stories about how Viper's training had saved their lives. The Navy was forced to respond. The Secretary of the Navy released a statement, in light of new evidence, we are reopening the investigation into the death of Lieutenant Jake Hawkins and the circumstances surrounding Captain Jack Hawkins's resignation. We are committed to truth and justice for all who serve. Morrison was placed on administrative leave pending the investigation. But the public wasn't satisfied with just an investigation. Crowdfunding campaigns started appearing overnight. Restore Viper's pension. Give Captain Hawkins what he's owed. Support a hero. Within 48 hours, over $2 million had been raised. Jack tried to refuse it. "I don't want charity," he told Sarah. "It's not charity, Dad. It's people trying to right a wrong. Let them help you." "But $2 million is less than what the Navy owes you in back pension and lost wages," Sarah pointed out. "Take it. You've earned it." The passengers from Flight 2847 organized their own initiative. They pooled money to buy Jack a new car, a decent apartment, and a year's worth of living expenses. "You saved our lives," the mother with the young child told him at a press event. "This is the least we can do." Airlines started reaching out. United Airlines offered him a consultant position, helping train pilots in emergency procedures. 6 figures, full benefits. "I'm 62 years old," Jack protested. "And you landed a 737 in a thunderstorm that 2 active fighter pilots couldn't handle," the United representative replied. "Age doesn't matter. Skill does. We want you." Boeing invited him to speak at their training facility. Simulator companies wanted to license his techniques. Book publishers offered deals for his autobiography. The world suddenly wanted Jack Hawkins again. But what mattered most to him was simpler. Sarah's house became Jack's home base. He met his grandson, Tommy, a bright 5-year-old who immediately adored his grandfather. "You're really a pilot?" Tommy asked, eyes wide. "I used to be," Jack said, kneeling down to the boy's level. "Dad says you flew fighter jets and fought bad guys." Jack smiled. "A long time ago, yes. Can you teach me to fly?" "Someday, if your parents say it's okay." Tommy hugged him fiercely. "I'm glad you're here, Grandpa." Jack had to blink back tears. "Me too, buddy. Me too." Sarah found him that evening sitting on her back porch, watching the sunset. "You okay, Dad?" "I'm overwhelmed," he admitted. "A month ago, I was driving a shuttle for minimum wage. Now I've got job offers, money I don't know what to do with, reporters calling every day. It's surreal." "You deserve it all," Sarah said firmly. "After what you went through." "What bothers me," Jack said slowly, "is that none of this would have happened if I hadn't been on that plane. If I'd been in any other seat. If those fighter pilots had known what they were doing. I'd still be driving that shuttle, and nobody would have cared." Sarah sat beside him. "But you were on that plane. You did save those people. And now the truth is out. You can't change how it happened, Dad. You can only decide what to do with this second chance." Jack looked at his daughter. "When did you get so wise?" "I had a good teacher," she said, leaning against his shoulder. "Even if I forgot that for a while." They sat together as the sun went down, father and daughter, broken family beginning to heal. The Inspector General's investigation took 6 weeks. It was thorough and damning. The report confirmed everything Reed and Chen had found. The defective hydraulic coupling. Morrison's emails ordering the cover-up. The timeline of the contract negotiations. The falsified second investigation report. But it went deeper. The investigation found that Morrison had accepted consulting fees from Aerodyne Systems totaling over $400,000 in the years following the contract. Essentially bribes disguised as legitimate payments. They found that the initial investigator who reported the mechanical failure had been transferred to a remote posting in Alaska immediately after submitting his report. Career punishment for telling the truth. They found that 3 other accidents involving aerodyne parts had been quietly settled with sealed records, preventing patterns from emerging. The report was devastating. Vice Admiral William Morrison was court-martialed. Stripped of rank. Dishonorably discharged. His pension revoked. The actions of Vice Admiral Morrison represent a betrayal of the trust placed in him by the American people and the sailors under his command, the presiding officer stated. He prioritized personal gain over sailor safety, falsified official investigations, and destroyed the career of an exemplary officer to conceal his misconduct. This is a stain on the uniform and will not be tolerated. Morrison was sentenced to 5 years in a federal prison. Jack watched the sentencing from Sarah's living room. Reed and Chen were there too, having flown out for the occasion. "How does it feel?" Reed asked. "Seeing him finally pay for what he did." Jack was quiet for a moment. "Empty, honestly. I thought I'd feel vindicated. But mostly I just feel sad. Sad that it happened at all. Sad that Jake is still gone. Sad that 12 years were wasted. But you have your life back now," Chen pointed out. "Your reputation, your family, your future." "True," Jack acknowledged. "And I'm grateful for that. But I'd trade it all to have my son back, or to have those 12 years with Sarah and Tommy." Sarah squeezed his hand. "We can't get those years back, Dad. But we have now. We have the future. That counts for something." "It counts for everything," Jack agreed. 3 months after the hearing, Jack received a call from the current commander of the Navy Fighter Weapons School. "Captain Hawkins, this is Captain Rodriguez. I'm calling with a rather unusual request." "What kind of request?" Jack asked, curious. "We'd like you to come back to Top Gun. Not as an instructor, unless you want that. But we're creating a new position, Senior Aviation Advisor. Essentially, you'd consult on our curriculum, share your experience with current instructors, maybe run some special training sessions. The Navy wants to make things right, sir. This is part of that." Jack leaned back in his chair at Sarah's house. "Captain, I appreciate the offer, but I'm 62 years old. I haven't flown a fighter in 12 years. We're not asking you to fly combat missions, sir. We're asking you to teach. Which is what you do best. The current generation of pilots needs to hear from someone who's been through what you have. Someone who can teach them not just about flying, but about honor, integrity, and how to handle adversity. I don't know. Sir, with respect, you owe it to every pilot who's ever read your manuals, studied your tactics, or been inspired by your story. You've got knowledge that can't be replicated. Are you really going to keep it to yourself?" Jack smiled. Rodriguez was good. "How much of that speech did you rehearse?" "All of it, sir." "Did it work?" "Maybe. Let me think about it." "Take all the time you need, sir. But we're hoping you'll say yes." Jack hung up and found Sarah in the kitchen. "Someone from Top Gun just offered me a job." Sarah looked up from her coffee. "Really? What kind of job?" He explained the position. Sarah listened, then smiled. "You're going to say yes, aren't you?" "I don't know. I've got the United Consulting gig. I've got speaking engagements booked for months. I don't need more work. This isn't about need, Dad. This is about what you love. I remember when I was a kid, you'd come home from Top Gun absolutely exhausted but completely alive. You loved teaching. You loved shaping young pilots. Do you really want to give that up?" Jack thought about it. Thought about those 2 young fighter pilots on Flight 2847, so confident in their skills until they realized how much they didn't know. Thought about the lessons he could teach, the experience he could share. "You know what? You're right." He called Rodriguez back. "I'm in. When do I start?" 6 months after Flight 2847 made its emergency landing, Jack Hawkins stood in front of a classroom at Naval Air Station Fallon, Nevada. 32 young pilots sat before him, the cream of the crop, sent to Top Gun to become the best. Jack wore a Navy consultant badge and a jacket with his old call sign, Viper. "Good morning," he began. "I'm Captain Jack Hawkins, retired. Most of you know me as Viper from the training manuals. Some of you know me as the guy who landed that commercial flight. What you might not know is that I spent 12 years driving an airport shuttle because the Navy destroyed my career." The room was completely silent. "I'm not telling you this for sympathy. I'm telling you this because the story you've been told about that accident 12 years ago was a lie. My son died because of a defective part, not because of inadequate training. But the Navy needed a scapegoat, and I was convenient." He paused, looking at each young face. "Now, here's what I want you to learn from this. First, skill doesn't transfer automatically between aircraft. I watched two excellent F-22 pilots nearly crash a 737 because they assumed their fighter experience would be enough. It wasn't. Every aircraft is different. Never assume you know everything. Second, the system isn't always right. Sometimes good people get blamed for things they didn't do. Sometimes the truth gets buried to protect powerful interests. Your job as officers is to maintain your integrity even when the system fails. Even when it costs you everything. Third, and most important, skill and knowledge are worth more than rank or reputation. When I walked onto that flight, I was nobody. A shuttle driver in a wrinkled uniform. But I had 50 years of experience, and that experience saved 267 lives. Never judge someone by their title or their uniform. Judge them by what they can do. He smiled. Now, let's talk about flying. Who here thinks they're a great pilot? Every hand went up. Good. You should be confident. But who here thinks they've got more to learn? The hands stayed up. Even better. That's the difference between good pilots and great ones. Great pilots never stop learning. Now, let's get to work. The session ran for 4 hours. Jack taught them about judgment under pressure, about the difference between combat flying and civilian flying, about staying calm when everything is falling apart. At the end, Lieutenant Reed and Captain Chin appeared at the door. They'd been transferred to Top Gun as instructors themselves, partly as recognition for their role in exposing the cover-up. "How'd the first class go, sir?" Reed asked. "They're good kids," Jack replied. "Remind me a lot of you too, actually. Confident, skilled, and convinced they know everything." Chen laughed. "We've learned a lot since that flight, sir. Mostly about humility." "That's the most important lesson," Jack agreed. "The one you can't teach in a simulator." He looked at these two young pilots who'd fought so hard for him, who'd refused to let injustice stand. "Thank you," he said simply. "For everything you did. For believing in me when nobody else would." "You saved our lives, sir," Reed replied. "And you taught us what real honor looks like. That's worth more than we could ever repay." A year after the emergency landing, Flight 2847 passengers organized a reunion. They met at a hotel in Seattle, 267 people who'd shared the most terrifying experience of their lives. Jack was the guest of honor. The mother with the young child approached him first. "Captain Hawkins, this is Emma. She was the baby who was crying during the emergency. She's 2 now." The toddler reached out to Jack, and he picked her up carefully. "Well, hello, Emma. I'm glad to see you've grown up safe and healthy. Say thank you to the nice man who saved us," the mother prompted. Emma just giggled and patted Jack's weathered face. More passengers came forward, sharing stories about how that day had changed them. Some had become pilots themselves, inspired by what they'd witnessed. Others had changed careers, pursuing dreams they'd put off. All of them were grateful to be alive. "You gave us a second chance," one man said, shaking Jack's hand. I was on that flight for a job interview I didn't really want. After we landed, I realized life was too short for that. I'm a teacher now. Making a difference instead of just making money. Good for you, Jack replied. That's what matters. Sarah watched her father interact with the passengers, saw how natural he was with people, how humble despite all the attention. Tommy tugged her sleeve. Mom, is Grandpa famous? Sort of, Sarah admitted. Is that why everyone wants to talk to him? People want to talk to him because he's a good man who did something important. Being famous is just a side effect. When I grow up, Tommy announced, I want to be like Grandpa. Sarah smiled and hugged her son. That's a good goal, sweetie. Later that evening, after most of the crowd had dispersed, Jack sat with Reed, Chen, Sarah, and a few close friends from the flight. Can I propose a toast? Reed asked, raising his glass. Everyone nodded. To Captain Jack Hawkins. Call sign Viper. Top Gun legend. Shuttle driver. Hero. Teacher. Father. Friend. You taught us that integrity matters more than rank. That skill speaks louder than titles. And that no matter how far you fall, redemption is possible if you never give up on who you are. Thank you for saving our lives. Thank you for teaching us how to fly. And thank you for showing us what honor really means. Here, everyone chorused, raising their glasses. Jack felt tears prick his eyes again. He seemed to be crying a lot these days, but they were good tears. Happy tears. Thank you all, he said simply. For giving me my life back. For believing in me. For fighting for the truth. I spent 12 years thinking I'd lost everything that mattered. Now I realize I was wrong. What matters isn't your rank or your reputation or your job. What matters is having people who care about you. Having purpose. Having the chance to make a difference. He looked at Sarah. Having family. Sarah raised her own glass. To second chances. And to not wasting them. Jack Hawkins stood on the tarmac at Naval Air Station Oceana, watching F divided by a -18s take off into the morning sky. He was 64 now, his hair completely white, but his eyes were still sharp and his mind sharper. He'd spent the last 2 years as senior aviation advisor at Top Gun, teaching hundreds of young pilots not just how to fly, but how to think, how to lead, how to handle adversity. The Navy had formally apologized and reinstated his full rank and pension, backdated 12 years. He'd donated most of it to scholarships for children of fallen pilots. His autobiography, From Top Gun to Shuttle Driver and Back, had become a bestseller. The movie rights had been sold. He'd appeared on countless talk shows, given speeches at military academies, and become a symbol of resilience and redemption. But what he was most proud of was standing next to him right now. Tommy, now 7 years old, wearing a mini flight suit that Sarah had bought him. Grandpa, when can I go flying with you? Soon, buddy. Very soon. I'm getting checked out in a trainer next month. Your mom said you can come up with me if you want. Really? Tommy's eyes went wide. In a real plane? A real plane, Jack confirmed. Not a fighter jet, but a good solid trainer. Want to try it? Yes. Sarah approached them, smiling. Don't get him too excited. He'll never sleep tonight. Good, Jack replied, ruffling Tommy's hair. A little excitement never hurt anyone. Reed and Chen walked over, both of them now senior instructors at Top Gun. Sir, we've got the new class arriving in an hour, Reed reported. You ready to scare another batch of cocky fighter pilots into humility? Always, Jack grinned. It's my favorite part of the job. I still can't believe you let us talk you into coming back, Chen said. Best decision I've made, Jack replied honestly. Well, second best. First best was getting on that flight to Seattle, even if it did almost kill me. It brought you here, Sarah pointed out. It brought you back to us. Sometimes the worst moments lead to the best outcomes. Jack looked at his daughter, his grandson, his students, his friends. He looked at the jets taking off, at the beautiful Virginia morning, at the life he'd rebuilt from absolute zero. You know, he said quietly, I spent 12 years angry. Bitter. Thinking the world had treated me unfairly. And it had. But being angry didn't change anything. It just made me miserable. What changed? Chen asked. That flight, Jack replied. When I walked to that cockpit, I wasn't thinking about the Navy or my reputation or anything I'd lost. I was just thinking, people need help, and I can help them. It reminded me why I became a pilot in the first place. Not for glory or recognition. To serve. To protect. To use my skills for something bigger than myself. He smiled. Once I remembered that, everything else fell into place. Tommy pulled on his hand. Grandpa, tell me the story about landing the plane in the storm again. Again. I told you yesterday. But it's my favorite story. Jack laughed and picked up his grandson. All right. So there I was, in the back of the plane in my shuttle driver uniform, when suddenly. As he told the story yet again, Sarah took a photo. Her father, against the backdrop of fighter jets, holding his grandson, surrounded by the students he'd trained and the friends he'd made. A man who'd lost everything and found it all again. A legend who'd been forgotten and remembered. A hero who'd worked minimum wage and never stopped being who he was. Captain Jack Hawkins. Call sign Viper. Top Gun instructor. Shuttle driver. Survivor. Teacher. Father. Grandfather. And most importantly, a man who proved that no matter how far you fall, no matter how long you're down, it's never too late to fly again.